Robby, let's get started. What is on your radar?
Let's get to it. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene is speaking out after President Donald Trump denounced her as a traitor to him and to the MAGA movement. This spectacular breakup between the president and one of his closest allies took place last week, with Trump writing on Truth Social, "I am withdrawing my support and endorsement of Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene of the great state of Georgia. I understand that wonderful conservative people are thinking about primarying Marjorie in her district of Georgia, that they too are fed up with her and her antics. And if the right person runs, they will have my complete and unyielding support." She has gone far left, even doing The View with their low IQ Republican-hating anchors. Thank you for your attention to this matter. If that wasn't clear enough, the president also wrote, "Marjorie Traitor Greene is a disgrace to our great Republican Party." Harsh words for a woman who personifies the very spirit of America First, whose only crime is occasionally disagreeing with the president when she thinks that he's gone astray from pursuing the policies of America First. Now, Greene appeared on CNN over the weekend and explained how Trump calling her a traitor was hurtful and untrue. Let's watch.
His remarks, of course, have been hurtful. However, I have something in my heart that I think is incredibly important for our country, and that is to end the toxic fighting in politics. And this has been going on for years, and it has divided our country, split up friends and families, neighbors, and it's not solving our problems. The most hurtful thing he said, which is absolutely untrue, is he called me a traitor, and that is so extremely wrong. And those are the types of words used that can radicalize people against me and put my life in danger.
MTG goes on to note that Trump's anger toward her is really solely based on her support for releasing more files related to convicted sex predator Jeffrey Epstein. Watch this.
I stand with these women. I stand with rape victims. I stand with children who are in terrible sex abuse situations, and I stand with survivors of trafficking and those that are trapped in sex trafficking. And I will not apologize for that. I believe the country deserves transparency in these files, and I don't believe that rich, powerful people should be protected if they have done anything wrong.
MTG notes, as I have, that we've no reason to believe Trump himself is implicated by the files. None of the victims of Epstein have implicated Trump in bad behavior, and the late Virginia Giuffre, the most notable of Epstein's many victims, explicitly acquitted Trump. But that's what makes Trump's opposition to greater disclosure so confusing. It makes it look like he does have something to hide. That's why Democrats are having a field day with this, even though the party clearly has no real interest in getting to the bottom of the Epstein issue, a few principled figures like Ro Khanna aside. MTG has also been sounding the alarm about the administration failing to pay sufficient attention to the issue of affordability. She knows it's still the economy, stupid. That widespread frustration over Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party's ignorant economic policies is what returned Trump to power. That's the main thing. Republicans need to be laser focused on lowering the costs of food and housing and childcare for all Americans. Unfortunately, all too often the administration is getting lost in the weeds and is implementing national security measures, immigration crackdowns, tariffs that, sure, maybe they are justifiable for other reasons, but they do not and will not make things more affordable for Americans. On the contrary, tariffs are just taxes, and the mass deportation of workers also raises costs. MTG understands that. Even Trump understands that to some extent. As I explained in my radar last week, Trump was absolutely right when he schooled Laura Ingraham on H-1B visas, explaining that we need to import high-skilled South Korean workers to the U.S. if we want to actually build the factories here. America First doesn't mean zero engagement with the rest of the world on trade and immigration. How could it? You can put your family first without committing to building all of your own furniture or growing all of your own food. A little bit of common sense economics would really help the Republican Party out of a tough spot right now, even as the Democratic Party seems inclined to fully pivot to Zohran Mamdani-style socialism and central planning, which will immiserate Americans. But back to MTG. I also want to salute her for the expert way in which she handled the mainstream media. CNN tried to trap her. Dana Bash asked MTG if she was so bothered by Trump's rhetoric toward her, why has she never spoken out against toxic rhetoric in the past? Here's how MTG responded.
I'm only responsible for myself and my own words and actions, and I am committed, and I've been working on this a lot lately, to put down the knives in politics. I really just want to see people be kind to one another, and we need to figure out a new path forward that is focused on the American people, because as Americans, no matter what side of the aisle we're on, we have far more in common than we have differences. Yeah. And we need to be able to respect each other with our disagreements.
Now, those are admirable sentiments. We can disagree with each other very passionately without wanting each other dead, obviously. We can hate each other's very bad or incorrect policy ideas without hating particular people. It is incumbent on everyone, right, left, and center, to bring down the level of toxicity in our political discourse and to assume good faith whenever possible, though we cannot use the threat of toxic discourse as an excuse to engage in censorship, as MTG makes clear. Now, sometimes free speech is messy, and it's unpolite, and it's uncivil. And that's simply the consequence of living in a free society, where people who disagree stridently are allowed to do so and to engage in persuasion in order to make this country a better place. The political rhetoric is very nice and polite in authoritarian countries because there isn't any.
Good stuff, Robby.
Thank you.
So I think that one of the curious things about the whole toxic rhetoric issue here is Trump branding Marjorie Taylor Greene a traitor. And she says that that has elicited threats toward her, including, I think in specific terms, a threat of a pipe bombing against her business. Now, firstly, just that rhetoric isn't helpful or useful to start off with. But secondly, to me, it points out how much the Republican Party has just become a party of Trump, because nothing that Marjorie Taylor Greene is advocating for is different than the supposed MAGA agenda. Right. She is very much aligned with Trump, or what were assumed to be Trump's beliefs about non-interventionism, about immigration, about issues like that. And it is the fact that she has broken with him on the Epstein thing that seems to have elicited this enormous anger. And I think that's just part of a bigger picture where the Republican Party is so much in his thrall. Right.
Maybe it's personal. Trump has suggested that it was because he dissuaded her from running for either Senate or governor of Georgia. She said on TV in this CNN interview that was absolutely not true, that they never had a conversation about that. So then CNN said, so are you saying Trump is lying about it? And she said, well, maybe he was misinformed about it by advisors that I was considering that. I say I was never considering it. Maybe there's some actual personal disagreement going on there. But yeah, the broader lesson is, and I'm not even sure I would say, you shouldn't, it's wrong to call her a traitor. She's not a traitor to America, certainly. She's not even a traitor to the Republican Party. She's doing what she thinks is right. She's doing what she thinks is in the best interest of the Republican Party. I don't know that calling someone a traitor is like necessarily inviting violence on them. Even though I generally agree with her, I kind of balked at her saying that that's akin to inviting attacks on my person.
Well, I don't know. I mean, if you're a patriotic American who supports Trump and he labels someone a traitor, the implication is that the action should be taken against that person, right? I mean, you can argue whether he means individuals should go after or not, but calling someone a traitor is very different from expressing vigorous disagreement with them in one way or another.
I'm not sure she had me sold on that point. But a lot of the other things she had to say I obviously agree with, and I think it will be unhealthy on the right to be litigating actual policy disagreements as personality disagreements, and that will be to the Democratic Party's advantage if Republicans go down this route.
I agree with that point.
Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, President Donald Trump still has 3 more years left in his term, but the battle to succeed him as leader of the Republican Party is already getting underway, even though Vice President J.D. Vance, the designated successor to Trump, will have a massive and likely decisive advantage in any such contest. Even so, Senator Ted Cruz is signaling that he may make a go of it. Axios reported yesterday that Cruz is laying the groundwork for a 2028 presidential bid by leaning into his feud with Tucker Carlson, by poking fun at Carlson's isolationist foreign policy views, accusing him of anti-Semitism and more. Cruz is putting himself on a collision course with Vice President Vance. That's according to Axios. Now, I think there's some truth to that. Cruz's feud with Tucker is, in some sense, a proxy war with Vance, who is staunchly aligned with Carlson on foreign policy and inclined to defend him. In fact, Vance recently spoke up on X to denounce Sloan Rashmuth, a journalist and self-described Zionist, who attacked Carlson's brother Buckley Carlson for signaling some alignment with Nick Fuentes, the controversial Carlson podcast guest known for espousing anti-Semitic views. Rashmuth questioned whether Tucker Carlson's son, who's also named Buckley, by the way, shared the views of his uncle. The younger Buckley works in Vance's office, so Vance spoke up to defend him, writing on X, Sloan Rashmuth is a journalist who has decided to obsessively attack a staffer in his 20s because she doesn't like the views of his father. Every time I see a public attack on Buckley, it's a complete lie. And fair enough, Vance is right here. It's fine to criticize Tucker or Tucker's brother, and it's fine to criticize young Buckley if he actually says something you dislike. But this kind of guilt by association tactic is off-putting to everyone. In fact, this kind of thing is the exact sort of overreach that is clearly driving some people into the arms of the more extreme fringes of Fuentes-type individuals. If you want to make Fuentes seem more appealing, then this is exactly the type of tactic to use. Smear anyone who platforms him as a Nazi, collaborator, and anti-Semite, attack their family members, and then denounce the family members who refuse to denounce their parents, children, or siblings. Well, this is cancel culture craziness, and it was obvious to conservatives that it was bad when the left was doing it. In fact, it led the left to self-cannibalize and become far less effective and coherent as a political movement. Today, we should recognize that the conservative movement and the Republican Party, which are now synonymous with MAGA and American First, stands at something of a crossroads. Trump, through his sheer force of will, has kept the coalition together for nearly a decade. But Trump won't be around forever, and factions are emerging. These factions are the hawkish and interventionist wings, led by people like Ted Cruz and Ben Shapiro. Then there's my own tech libertarian faction, which is led by Elon Musk, Rand Paul, and Thomas Massie. Finally, there are the populists, which have a lot of popular appeal among the MAGA base, true to their name, but also contain a few different factions. Vance, for instance, is clearly a leading populist, but this rising Fuentes fringe, they actually despise Vance. They think he's an insincere populist, and because they are racist, they don't like that he's married to an Indian woman. Then there are people like Laura Loomer and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who are both populists, though Loomer is closer to the interventionist faction and MTG is closer to the libertarian faction. As a result, those two women hate each other, and Loomer is currently doing everything she can to destroy MTG. So that's a long way of saying, promising really, that the GOP might look very different 3 years from now. And while it's likely, extremely likely, that Vance is the next GOP standard bearer, it's not yet clear which ideological faction will control MAGA. But whichever faction does win, it's going to have to make peace with two important realities. First, the foreign policy consensus has forever shifted toward non-interventionism. That doesn't mean non-interventionists are going to win every foreign policy battle. It only means that there's no going back to the Bush era, nation building, and all of that kind of thing. Second, the GOP is going to have to do a better job of challenging the actual racists and anti-Semites in their midst. That doesn't mean relentlessly picking battles with friends and allies, but it does mean exercising a bit more discipline about who speaks on MAGA's behalf. And it means engaging and combating the ideas of Nicholas Fuentes.
I thought this was a really solid breakdown of like all the different things within the party. I think that you have a very gracious perspective when it comes down to the infighting within MAGA and within what
Well, I enjoy spectating it.
Well, but I mean, I feel like it also, for many people, if it was happening under anyone else, I feel like that wasn't President Trump, it would be like, this party is in complete disarray. What does it want? What are you doing? What are the mission statements? Because like you said, Trump does what he wants. So what does the party look like after President Trump? I mean, there's actual fighting about almost every step of the way, starting with tariffs, going down to what's going on in Venezuela, coming on to Epstein, and then just a straight up beef with Marjorie Taylor Greene now. He's like, this person who supported me, I don't support her in any way. There's Indiana redistricting. They can't even get it right. Trump is personally attacking a lot of lawmakers that won't say they want to redistrict when most of the country thinks that we should not be doing that anyway as a political gotcha gotcha move, whether you're a Democrat or Republican. So there's so much within the party. And then there's also the obvious and very large step away from the historical stance of the Republican Party, which is to be fiscally conservative, which we know that by the big, beautiful bill and other actions the president has taken, speaking of those tariffs, is slowly pulling the Conservative Party away from what it traditionally stood for with all these older people, like you always reference, in government, that said that they fought for that for the last 2 decades. So how do you then move forward from this and figure out what the party looks like without a figure like Trump? And yes, he can be around and he can campaign for people, but when he's not actually on the ballot, it might actually hurt people just because he's around, because they know that he can't actually do anything in a leadership role besides maybe advise.
Right.
So, I think that you have a lenient view, but if it was on the Democrat side, you would be like, this is a show. A blank show.
Well, Democrats are doing their own version of this, with one faction wanting the party to move toward a wholesale embrace of socialism and another faction wanting more moderation, more centrism. I mean, see the debate. Bill Maher was airing this debate over the weekend between Abigail Spanberger, prevailing in Virginia, someone who once said that she doesn't want to hear Democrats say the word socialism ever again, on one side. On the other side, Zohran Mamdani, a socialist, actually winning mayor of New York. So Democrats are going to have a kind of slightly different, maybe less acrimonious, maybe more, I don't know, version of this debate. And I think debate is good. I'm not against it. No one needs to march in lockstep to whatever party establishment leadership decides. That would not be a good idea. So we're going to spend the next couple years hashing it out, and we're going to find out what is the agenda for the next Republican leader. That's presumably J.D. Vance. I think it's highly likely to be J.D. Vance. But what set of ideas he associates himself with is a little bit still up for grabs.
I think there has to be some clear pillars of the party, right? And even for Democrats, I say the same thing. Like, what are the actual pillars that the party does not sway away from?
We hate Trump. That's their pillar.
Okay, I'm not talking about Democrats, though. Yeah. We're breaking down.
We love Trump. That's Republicans.
But that's what I mean. Like, what are the pillars past Trump? Because there lies the confusion. I think that
it's been 10 years of Trump being the pillars.
But now, what happens, because there were years and years and decades of consistent pillars that existed prior to Trump that all went out the window because Trump was something new, something that understood business, something that was a new wave of leadership. Some of those ways not fully fulfilled, some fulfilled in a totally different way that looked more democratic, like policy-wise, than any other historical Republican. So that's what the soul searching has to do with, because people may not want a J.D. Vance who's so closely aligned with President Trump to be up next, because they may have fatigue from this, like we saw in the election that Trump lost against Joe Biden. So I think we're going to see either they're going to respond to it and say more of Trump allies or completely something different. Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, the Trump administration signaled yesterday that it was moving forward on one of President Trump's key election promises, shutting down the Department of Education. As someone who has advocated for this outcome for many, many years, I'm personally thrilled it's finally coming to this. Now, the administration announced that the department's core functions would be handed off to other agencies in anticipation of finally closing down the building itself. Actually abolishing the Education Department would take an act of Congress, though the Supreme Court has okayed Trump's move to fire many of the department's bureaucrats, which is a good start. Frankly, it's astonishing to me that this is actually happening. Republicans have been promising to shut down the Education Department for 50 years. Ronald Reagan ran on ending it in 1980, a decade before I was even born. Every Republican president and most presidential candidates similarly vowed to shut it down, but then never took up the issue again when they had the chance to do so. The Trump administration is keenly aware of this. Yesterday, the Education Department's X account posted an unusually honest video about GOP achievements on this front to date, or lack thereof. Take a look.
I would like to dissolve the $10 billion National Department of Education created by President Carter.
But better education doesn't mean a bigger Department of Education. In fact, that department should be abolished.
I can assure you that teachers don't want to waste their time making their way through a maze of regulations.
That's not all. The video continues.
We have to literally erase the board and rethink from the ground up.
There's no authority for the federal government to be involved in education. my administration will take all lawful steps to shut down the department. We're going to shut it down and shut it down as quickly as possible.
Now, as the day has finally come that a Republican administration is serious about fulfilling its promises and shutting down an unnecessary federal bureaucracy, then great. I want to be clear, however, that we should not merely shuffle all the existing functions of the department to other agencies. We should eliminate unnecessary, counterproductive, and, yes, unconstitutional interference from the federal government into the state's education policies. Closing the Department of Education is one of those ideas that really spooks liberal Democrats, even though it's far less radical an idea than they are willing to admit or consider. For starters, the department is simply unconstitutional. The Constitution does not grant the federal government any power to regulate education. That's reason enough in my book to close it down. Furthermore, the department doesn't actually do what it appears to do. It doesn't employ any teachers, it doesn't manage any classrooms, and it doesn't interact with students in any direct way. What it does is oversee grant money. For K-12, federal spending on education is small. It's only about 10% or less of what schools receive. Most of the money from K-12 schools, that comes from the states themselves. We certainly don't need a sprawling federal bureaucracy just to administer such a paltry sum of money. Now, the Department of Education does play a much larger role in the funding of higher education, in that the department oversees the student loan program, the federal program. That program needs to be scrapped anyway. We have now ample evidence that subsidizing student loans at the federal level is causing runaway tuition inflation and saddling thousands or millions of Americans with unsustainable levels of debt. We need to get rid of it now. After all, as Education Secretary Linda McMahon pointed out, most of the department was offline during the shutdown, the government shutdown, and we hardly noticed. Schools kept running all across the country.
The Federal Department of Education furloughed 90% of its staff. And what happened? Nothing. Schools stayed open. Students went to class. Teachers got paid. The shutdown proved our schools don't depend on Washington bureaucracy to function.
Yeah, she makes a good point. So why do we need it? We don't. And I'm for shutting it down immediately, Lindsay. Say goodbye to the Department of Education.
I'm against it. I think the reason why we saw so many years go past where you see Republicans coming to the forefront and making it, a big claim about shutting it down and it never happening is because most of the country is against it. And so when kids become political capital or collateral, that's a big problem for me. Also, it's a big problem for the country. The Wall Street Journal said that 61% of voters actually oppose dismantling the Department of Education, and similar majorities also support prioritizing education and the Department of Education over funding tax cuts, which is where a lot of this extra free money possibly might go if we start to dismantle and gather funds. And so I think, according to the National Education Association, there's a lot of negative impacts that this will have. You're calling this small, minute amount that the federal government gives to local schools something that's irrelevant, but it's certainly not. I think the vast majority of kids go to public schools. We're talking about 90% of students in the country.
But we're not going to close any public schools. It's
I know, but they're going to lose. If it's 10% of that funding, it's still a significant amount of funding that we need to be overviewing.
They're going to have that funding. No, they're not getting rid of that funding. They're just going to have it administered by the Department of Labor.
According to people who studied this and spend a lot of time, people with kids with disabilities, they could be people that suffer the most. 95% of students that have disabilities go to public schools. So without federal oversight and funding, then these kids won't get the services, equipment, or some of the things that 10% of irrelevant funding you're talking about goes to. Class sizes might also explode, which would be a problem and a huge loss for teachers. Programs that pay for reading specialists, smaller class sizes, and high poverty areas provide support in those ways.
Well, they're not getting rid of those programs. They're just going to have them
they're shuffling them around so that it's all unorganized. And then you're suggesting that they go further and don't even shuffle them, just straight up cut them.
I would straight up cut them.
But these will affect students. So that's what I'm saying. It also could possibly weaken protection against discrimination. So the Department of Education also has a job to enforce rules that protect kids from any discrimination in the classroom. Would you like to open the door for no oversight in that? And so there are a lot of things that that kids should be discriminated against.
Federal efforts to prohibit or protect or stop discrimination in schools have been disastrous. Under Obama, the Education Department sent guidance to K-12 schools that they had to be careful of disparate disciplinary actions on students. And so schools got spooked that they were going to lose federal funding if they disciplined kids and it seemed that there was some racial discrepancy. But of course, because
Does anybody care about the student that's disciplined because of racial discrepancy and then ends up in a pipeline that's not the best life for them?
Well, yeah.
Like, this is relevant
This is exactly
too.
why we're shutting that down. That's holding back the entire classroom when you can't discipline badly behaved kids.
Okay, just eating though. Like, the Department of Education also helps with free meals and funding of those free meals and
where in the
basic services
Constitution
for
does it
schools.
say that the federal government should provide meals?
You want more kids or less kids to be fed? I mean, we're literally in a time right now where a lot of people are still
really.
Yeah, that's what you're looking forward to by having less meal programs in school. Like, there are people who actually rely on those, who won't eat breakfast, lunch, or dinner without those. There's people who are relying on SNAP benefits, and the government has been shut down, and they're going to school and looking for that first meal when their parents didn't cook last night. But you're so worried about giving money to tax cuts, or where do you want that money to go?
There's no federal authority oversight to have that program. The states can.
But you're in an island with this. 60% of Americans, according to the Wall Street Journal, which is hardly a liberal website, says that Americans would like to keep the Department of Education.
60% of Americans can say we'd like to abolish the First Amendment. It wouldn't make it.
Who is the president doing this for, though? No one's calling. He can focus on so much that's bothering people right now. Right? Americans are largely uncomfortable with their finances.
He's doing it for
There's so
families
much that he can do,
and for
but families
students
aren't asking
and
for this. That's why I'm confused
this
about
policy,
somebody that has a child in school. It's just like, who's asking for this? No parents are coming to the table. There's no policy, though. All he's saying is, let's abolish it, and I'm getting it done. What are the next steps? That's always been my problem with the administration. They throw out these blanket statements and then leave it in disarray. That was my problem with Doge. Sure, we can cut, but you left everything in disarray with no plan or way forward. And that's why some things stuck, some things didn't stuck.
Well, we're not addressing the main thing that the Education Department does, because this is a small amount of money when we're talking about K through 12, is administer a federal student loans program that correlates, statistically has been shown to correlate with spiraling out of control higher education costs. We just desperately need to change this program. People are finishing college with massive levels of debt, and then they can't get jobs to pay off that debt. It's all due to the federal government subsidize it. It's all due to this program. That is what their main role is, to oversee that program that is ruinous for people of our generation and people who are younger.
But colleges will still get more expensive. So with a lack of...
They've gotten more expensive in direct proportion to how much subsidized student loans there are.
With a lack of next steps, with a lack of plan, and just suggesting that we should cut the federal government, which supplies 30% of college student loans, I think that we need to be considerate that people, if 30% of students rely on that, what we're going to do instead.
But we're not doing that.
Because people cannot get these loans.
We're tricking them. They're tricks.
I don't like the student loan system either. That's why they're being forgiven. I just think that if there's nothing in its place, then people can't go to school.
That we have
Who
to
can
forgive
afford
them.
school?
Isn't that a admission that this is a bad program?
If it's a bad, but what's the next step?
Years later, we have to contemplate having to just forgive the
where
debt.
they push an idea forward but have no solution to it. So
the solution is to end the bad idea.
And then what? How do kids get to college? How do kids afford college is what I'm asking.
College tuition was affordable. You could work and afford it.
Tell me how they afford
40 years
right
ago
now.
before we started this program.
Okay, you're talking about ancient history. You want to abolish the way that kids get into school. They don't have a lot of money. So how do they afford college now that they cut all the federal programs that provide Pell Grants?
The price of tuition would be cheaper if the government was not encouraging the schools to raise rates.
So no plan then.
No. If we're talking about public universities, the University of Michigan is a public university. That's where I went in the state of Michigan. The government of the state of Michigan could order the school to lower its tuition prices so that the residents of the state can afford to go there. I'd be all for that.
That would require coordination from
I'm all for that.
Federal programs.
I'm all for government schools to be ordered by the government. Schools can be administered by the government, and they should make them cheaper. I agree with that.
Robby, what's on your radar?
Well, this is a fun one. Oopsies. Representative Jasmine Crockett might not be ready for prime time. Earlier this week, she fired back at Republicans for receiving money from Jeffrey Epstein as part of her attempts to defend her friend, Virginia Islands delegate Stacey Plaskett, from charges that she enjoyed an overly cozy relationship with the disgraced financier and sexual predator. Crockett attacked Mitt Romney, John McCain, Sarah Palin, and Lee Zeldin, all past and current Republican officials, for them having had contact with Jeffrey Epstein. There's just one problem. The Jeffrey Epstein who donated to Zeldin, to Romney, and to those other Republicans is not the Jeffrey Epstein, i.e. the one who died in prison under mysterious circumstances and has embroiled various associates in scandal, such as Prince Andrew and Larry Summers. The Jeffrey Epstein whose political donations Crockett is highlighting is an entirely different person. Seriously, watch this.
Folks who also took money from somebody named Jeffrey Epstein, as I had my team dig in very quickly. Mitt Romney the NRCC, Lee Zeldin, George Bush, Win Red, McCain Palin, Rick Lazio. I just want to be clear. If this is the standard that we're going to make, just know we're going to expose it all. And just know that the FEC filings, they are available for everybody to review. This is absolutely ridiculous.
Notice how she prefaced her remarks by describing the individual in question as someone named Jeffrey Epstein. Well, that part is too. Dr. Jeffrey Epstein did give money to New York Republican gubernatorial candidate Lee Zeldin. But that is not the same Jeffrey Epstein. And we know it because Zeldin ran for governor in 2022, which is 3 years after the death of the other Jeffrey Epstein, the pedophile. Now, Zeldin slammed Crockett, noting, "No relation, you genius." So Crockett's lame insinuations about Zeldin and other Republicans are false, absolutely false. Note also what she's trying to do here, which is attempting to run cover for Stacey Plaskett, who is extremely complicit in efforts to shelter and protect Jeffrey Epstein, the actual Jeffrey Epstein. As revealed by journalist Lee Fong, Plaskett previously worked for Epstein's fixer in the Virgin Islands and solicited him for campaign donations when she ran to be the Virgin Islands non-voting delegate. Here was Fong on Rising 2 years ago discussing their relationship.
As Plaskett solicited Epstein in 2018, a year before his death, for $30,000 to the DCCC, the House Democrats' campaign arm. Again, that was Erica Kellerhall's forwarding on that appeal.
The House moved to censor Plaskett, but that vote failed this week as 3 Republicans joined all Democrats in voting to protect her. Republicans may have done that as part of a deal to prevent Democrats from censoring Republican Corey Mills over various misdeeds. Isn't it great when the two parties can come together to protect each other in cases of public corruption? Just another day in Washington, D.C. And I also saw that Jasmine Crockett was defending herself on CNN with Caitlin Collins, I think last night. And Caitlin Collins was like, "It's not the same Jeffrey Epstein." So she's like, "Well, I didn't say it was. We just Googled, and, who knows what's coming up here." It was the lamest excuse I've ever heard. This was flagrantly inappropriate for her to do this, and she's doing it for her friend who actually is complicit in Epstein stuff.
Well, she did say someone named Jeffrey Epstein.
Okay.
She said that.
Okay.
She said someone, Robby.
Yeah.
She said
yeah.
So, I mean, if you don't accept that, then you also can't accept that President Trump doesn't know the people that he pardoned that are Bitcoin billionaires that give money to businesses. So we all are on the same page of not knowing and making mistakes, right?
We're not all on the same page. Stacey Plaskett knew who he was.
Right, so Stacey Plaskett's argument, and since she's a delegate of the Virgin Islands, and the Virgin Islands has a lot to do with Jeffrey Epstein, she wanted more information, and she thought that by going directly to the source, she can get more information. That is what she's arguing. So let's get to the bottom of it. If anything, there's the thing that people are on the same page about now that we're here is releasing more information in regards to Epstein, when it comes specifically to the Virgin Island, when it comes specifically to politicians that may have been linked to him, celebrities, anybody with money, financiers, treasury records that we have and who he was paying and why, foreign governments and why. And so I think if somebody is trying to do their due diligence, because they should have all the information if they are representing the Virgin Islands, they should have all the information. If they're trying to get to a source and get information, share that. Because if we want everything released, share the exchange between she and Jeffrey Epstein in full. Every single exchange they ever had.
We're sharing it, and it's bad because people are worked up about maybe a birthday card that Trump might have allegedly sent Jeffrey Epstein 30 years ago. Stacey Plaskett hit Jeffrey Epstein up for donations after his time in prison. He relocated to the Virgin Islands after the prison stint. That is where he picked to set up further behavior. There are allegations that occurred on the Virgin Islands. He tried to change the sex offender laws of the Virgin Islands to make it easier for him to come and go.
I don't think we should protect anyone that has a relationship with Jeffrey Epstein that was leading to him or enabling him to continue to commit crimes and making it easier for him to commit crimes.
I'm saying that is Stacey Plaskett.
Well, she's saying something different. So that's all. I'm just telling you what.
And Jasmine Crockett, in her defense, is like, well, Lee Zeldin got a donation from Jeffrey Epstein. I mean, that's so lame.
I don't think
that's just pathetically lame, obviously.
I don't think that the right path to go down in this instance is to figure out who is more connected to Jeffrey Epstein. I think it's that everybody that is connected to Jeffrey Epstein after.
And Lee Zeldin is not connected to Jeffrey Epstein.
I know. He's not. This is the wrong person. And it's hilarious. It's a ridiculous miscalculation. And you laughed very hard in the office. I was like, well, that sucks for her.
Yeah.
I smirked because I was like, damn, that's messed up.
Yeah.
I think that we need to get to the point. is that there's survivors that are on Capitol Hill trying to really figure out what the next steps are. There are people that really want these files released. And I think we're just in a predicament where the more we make jokes out of this and do things like the stunt that Jasmine Crockett pulled, the more
I'm glad
that
you concede it's a stunt.
I don't think that it's a good idea. There's real people that are affected by all of this.
Yeah.
And I think that that's a big deal.
Well, yes, and frankly, it speaks to a concern that some Republicans or Trump world people have raised, which is you're just going to start doing random guilt by association. And here she was attacking Republican figures for being linked to a different Jeffrey Epstein. That's kind of exactly what the fear is, that we're going to just go wild and start accusing people of things.
I told you it was not a good look.
Yeah.
It was not a good look.
It's hard
I could
to
see
defend
that was not a good look. I don't think she should go on CNN and try to just say it was an error, and you're overwhelmed with the amount of lengths that you're going to try to make sure that everyone connected to Jeffrey Epstein is exposed, and so you made a miscalculation. I think that's the best response to this, but that doesn't mean that people should stop going to great lengths to get people the answers that they've been calling for on both sides of the aisle, correct?
Of course, and I would like to see a lot more about Stacey Plaskett's relationship to Jeffrey Epstein, which seems very, very bad. Larry Summers has now stepped back from his role because of him being compromised. Stacey Plaskett is every bit as compromised and more so, so I don't know why she's still going to be in office. This censure vote failed because Republicans were worried about Democrats censoring Corey Mills over various accusations against him. Nancy Mace, a Republican, has actually made a stolen valor accusation against him. But they all want to get together to protect themselves. That's our Congress. How lovely.